Tonight at 10, turmoil at the BBC as Gary Lineker is forced to step back from Match of the Day over tweets about the government's asylum policy. Ian Wright and Alan Shearer have walked out of tomorrow's programme in protest. In the last hour, the BBC said the show will focus on match action without studio presentation or punditry. Gary Lineker was told he cannot return until there is a clear and agreed position on his use of social media. The BBC's Director General defended his decision.
As Editor-in-Chief of the BBC, I think one of our founding principles is impartiality, and that's what we're delivering on.
But there are questions tonight about the corporation's enforcement of its rules on impartiality, with its chairman under investigation over previous links with Boris Johnson. Also on the programme, asylum policy also centre stage at a meeting in Paris, where the UK promises France £500 million to deal with illegal channel crossings. The gang who stole £10 million of taxpayers' money that should have been used to help small businesses during COVID. We tell the story of 4 Afghan sisters terrorised by the Taliban, now living in safety in Germany.
Never fighting, but it always wins.
And the music from small-town America that's now booming in the UK.
And later on BBC London, the new helpline which the Met says will put victims at the heart of policing. But does it go far enough?
Good evening. The BBC is in crisis tonight after forcing Gary Lineker to step back from presenting Match of the Day over critical tweets about the government's immigration policy. Its move led to Ian Wright and Alan Shearer pulling out of the programme in solidarity. And the BBC has, in the last hour, said the show will go ahead with match action, but with no studio presenter or pundit. It comes after Gary Lineker compared the Home Secretary's language on people arriving here on small boats with that used in 1930s Germany. The BBC's Director General, Tim Davies, says the action taken against him is proportionate. BBC staff are expected to remain impartial and not express personal opinions in public. Some defending Gary Lineker have said that as a freelance sports presenter, those rules do not apply to him. Here's our media correspondent, David Silito.
We've got big games at both
Gary
ends
Lineker,
of the
for more
table.
than 20 years the face of Match of the Day. But not tomorrow. He's been taken off air by the BBC, and his co-presenters Alan Shearer and Ian Wright won't be appearing either as a mark of solidarity with Gary Lineker. The reason? These tweets in which he described a statement about immigration policy by the Home Secretary as beyond awful, and then went on to say it was immeasurably cruel, and the language used not dissimilar to that used by Germany in the 30s. The corporation says this breaks their guidelines on impartiality, and in a statement said the BBC has decided that he will step back from presenting Match of the Day until we've got an agreed and clear position on his use of social media.
If Gary Lineker breached the guidelines, why didn't you sack him?
Well, I think we always look to take proportionate action, and that's what we've done.
But haven't you just kicked it further down the line? Aren't you delaying the
Well,
inevitable?
I don't want to add to the statement. I think we've had very constructive discussions. The statement's very clear, and that's where we are. As Editor-in-Chief of the BBC, I think one of our founding principles is impartiality, and that's what we're delivering on.
This is not what Gary Lineker was expecting. Only yesterday he said he wasn't fearing suspension.
Do you fear getting suspended?
No.
And he was looking forward to presenting this weekend. One of those furious with the BBC is Alistair Campbell, who now has a podcast produced by Gary Lineker's production company.
I think this decision is driven by an utterly craven political cowardice at the top of the BBC. And that is what has led to Gary Lineker. And this thing about, stepping backwards, let's be absolutely frank about this. It's been pretty made clear to Gary Lineker, I would imagine, he's not going to be presenting Match of the Day because he's not towing the line.
The BBC says it would like to resolve this, but Gary Lineker's given no indication he's going to be silenced, and he's not bound by the strict rules covering news. But there is a clause in the rules saying if you have a high profile, there is an extra responsibility.
If you allow the most highly paid presenter on the BBC to breach the guidelines in a way that the BBC says he has, then why should anybody else who's paid less obey the guidelines? And the BBC has to be impartial and perceived to be impartial.
And for the BBC, there is another issue hanging over it. Its chairman. There is an ongoing inquiry into Richard Sharp's role in a loan made to Boris Johnson, which has raised many questions about his appointment and impartiality. But this weekend, it's all about Gary Lineker, with presenters lining up to say they won't be replacing him. Match of the Day will take place tomorrow, with no presenters and no pundits.
David, first of all, tomorrow's Saturday night on BBC One is going to look very different from usual.
When the announcement was made by the BBC this afternoon, the first thought was, well, who will replace him? Then name after name became clear that they would not be standing in for him. Ian Wright, Alan Shearer, in solidarity, they said, with Gary Lineker. The decision to have no presenter, no pundits has in many ways been made for the BBC, and it'll be a very different programme tomorrow night.
The focus has, David, all been on Gary Lineker and on Match of the Day, but this whole episode raises some very big questions for the BBC.
Absolutely. I mean, the central part of this is every year the BBC publishes salaries. Top of that list, £1.3 million is Gary Lineker, and he is more than just a presenter. He's very much a face of the BBC and has been a lightning rod for this issue of impartiality, which the Director General has made an absolute cornerstone. But you've got to remember, there are dozens and dozens of people who present BBC programmes, among them some ex-cabinet ministers who they still have political opinions. Who does this apply to? Who does it not apply to? And there are large parts of the audience who also think that this is just bowing to political pressure. But the central issue this weekend is Gary Lineker. The BBC would dearly like to find a resolution to this, but both sides don't look as though they're going to budge. Rita.
OK, David, many thanks. Our media correspondent, David Silito. Well, the issue of small boat crossings has also been central at a meeting in Paris between Rishi Sunak and the French President Emmanuel Macron. They agreed to redouble the effort to try and stop such crossings to the UK, with the French leader saying tackling migration needs to be a joint effort. As part of that, Britain is to double the amount of money it's giving to France to tackle channel crossings, almost £500 million over the next 3 years. That will go towards a new detention centre in France. There'll also be more French personnel and enhanced technology to patrol beaches, from where over 45,000 people made the crossing last year. Our political editor Chris Mason reports now from Paris.
Heading overseas by train, the early service to France. Arriving in the courtyard of the Elysee Palace,
Is France a friend or foe, Prime Minister?
a reminder that relations have been bumpy of late. But look at this, a warmth in the Parisian breeze, pleasantries and handshakes, arm in arm, hand in hand. The two leaders met for an hour and 20 minutes, although we were eased out rather sooner. Later, they almost gushed in mutual admiration.
I believe today's meeting does mark a new beginning, an entente renewed.
Et c'est pourquoi aujourd'hui ce sommet est en cela exceptionnel.
The French president said the summit was exceptional and a moment of reunion, of reconnection.
De reconnexion.
And the Prime Minister set out why they thought a new deal for dealing with migrants was necessary.
Emmanuel and I share the same belief. Criminal gangs should not get to decide who comes to our countries. Within weeks of my coming into office, we agreed our largest ever small boats deal. And today we've taken our cooperation to an unprecedented level to tackle this shared challenge.
Today's new deal will see more than double the number of personnel deployed here in northern France. This will be paid for in part by the UK more than doubling its annual funding for this. Some of the money will help build a detention centre in France too, although it won't be fully up and running until the end of 2026. All part of the efforts to cut the number of people trying to cross the channel like this.
The same question to you both, if I may. Do you think you'll ever be able to arrange a deal where migrants leaving France for the UK are returned to France?
What you've seen today is an unprecedented level of cooperation on tackling this shared challenge, because that's what it is. It's a shared challenge. And going forward, there will be more that we can do. We started that last November. We've built on it today.
First, I think we focus on what we have to do on the short run. Second, this is not an agreement between UK and France, but an agreement between UK and the EU, because Dublin Agreement are no more in a situation to be implemented. So this is something now to be negotiated.
In other words, a returns agreement isn't happening. Brexit has been something of a stone in the shoe of UK-France relations for years, but the Prime Minister hopes he has shaken it out with his personal relationship with the President and that new Brexit deal for Northern Ireland, which has improved relations with the European Union. But on the issue of small boats, Rishi Sunak acknowledges there is no simple solution to resolve the issue. And remember, this is one of his key promises, resolving the issue. Personal relationships aren't everything in diplomacy, but they do matter. Bromance under a shared brolly tells you rather a lot about how things have changed. But ultimately, it's what it delivers that really matters. Chris Mason, BBC News in Paris.
Let's speak now to our Europe editor, Katya Adler, who's in Paris for us. Katya, how do you assess the significance of today?
Well, one of the biggest significance is that this meeting happened at all, Rita. It comes after 5 years of cancelled high-level summit and all of those post-Brexit rows about vaccines and migrants and fishing rights. What we saw here in Paris today was a very public resetting of relations between two great allies. More than that, it felt like the UK's very public resetting, symbolic resetting of its relations with its wider European allies. Rishi Sunak said again today, the UK has left the EU, but it hasn't left Europe. And think, Rita, about the backdrop to today's summit. Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the increased wider security concerns, those rising energy prices and inflation as well. These are cross-continental challenges, and Europe's leaders think they can better tackle them together. The UK and France, don't forget, are Europe's biggest military powers inside NATO. And so if they work together, they can tackle these challenges so much better together. So Rishi Sunak is known here, of course, as a Brexiteer, but he's also seen as a pragmatist. Today, he addressed the French president as mon ami. This is a very stark contrast to his predecessor, Liz Truss, who said she wasn't sure whether he was a friend or a foe. It's a new tone for these new beginnings.
Katya, many thanks. Now, they were government loans meant to help keep companies afloat during the COVID pandemic, but billions of pounds were defrauded in the government's bounce back loan scheme. Now, a BBC investigation can reveal the inside story of a criminal gang who stole more than £10 million of taxpayers' money. They laundered tens of millions more. After a final court case which ended today, a total of 10 people have now been sentenced. Our correspondent Angus Crawford has the details.
Bags full of cash, bundles of dirty notes. They even needed a safe. Now, after a series of court cases, the inside story of the gang that stole £10 million of taxpayers' money.
I've never seen anything like it, so it is the biggest one I know of. It's the biggest one I've seen, and it's probably going to be the biggest one we will see for a long time.
When COVID shut down the economy, the Chancellor announced the Bounce Back loan scheme.
Well, today we announced a brand new loan scheme.
£50,000 on offer for small firms, with few questions asked.
To support UK smaller businesses.
The gang used a network of bogus companies to make hundreds of claims. Ringleaders Artem Terzian and Davis Grochatsky received long prison sentences. They have strong links to Lithuania, and we've learned that the directors of two of the companies used in the fraud are still living there. And here they are, Yekaterina Kobrina and Povilas Bartkavicius, a model and a chef. We just want to ask you where the money went.
What money?
The money from the bounce back loans. Your name is on a company, Bart Solution, yes? And that received £10 million in your name.
What?
Yeah, your name.
I don't know anything. If I had some money or 10,000 K, I didn't work 2 jobs here.
Povilas tells us he has no idea his name was being used in this way. Next, we track down Yekaterina.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you. I ask her about the company in her name.
But I don't know anything. And you should ask other people. No comments, only with my lawyer.
We have no idea if either of them knew what those companies were being used for. And the National Crime Agency says their investigation is over.
It was a colossal sum of money, gone to some very, very bad people.
Lord Agnew was the government's counter-fraud minister until he resigned, appalled by the loss of billions of pounds from the scheme.
I'm worried that there is still a reluctance to grip this with real vigour.
So as we stand, do we think that those at the top of government have learnt the lessons of the bounce back loan scheme?
I would like to hope so, but I'm not convinced.
So where does that leave us? We've found 2 people whose names are on the companies which were used for the money laundering and the bounce back loan fraud. But we just don't know if they had any idea where the money came from and where it went to. And as for that money, are we going to find it? Is the British taxpayer going to get it back? It looks highly unlikely. Loans which kept firms afloat also made criminals rich. Angus Crawford, BBC News, Vilnius in Lithuania.
And you can see Angus's full story on the BBC iPlayer. That's the chef, the model and the missing millions. Police in the city of Hamburg in Germany say a gunman has killed 7 people, including an unborn child, at a religious service for Jehovah's Witnesses. They say the attacker, who was a former member of the community, acted alone and took his own life. Jenny Hill has the details.
In the quiet of a city suburb, a man prepares to kill. Caught on a mobile phone as he peers through a window, readies his gun. Inside, Jehovah's Witnesses had gathered to worship, oblivious to his presence, his intentions.
I was filming with my phone and only realised through the Zoom that someone was shooting at the Jehovah's Witnesses.
By the time police arrived, he was inside, a deadly rampage underway. But then he turned his gun on himself. It's emerged he once belonged to this community, but he'd left the Jehovah's Witnesses on bad terms.
It's a horrible act, a very cruel deed. We've seen a few things in Hamburg, but a mass killing on this scale is new to us. We knew it from TV, but we didn't imagine it could happen in our city.
And he brought terror to these streets. Casualties rushed to safety. No time for stretchers. At this point, no one knew whether he was acting alone. By first light, a terrible tally. 7 people shot dead, among them an unborn baby. Bodies brought out as investigators scoured the building. Revelations emerging too. Police confirmed they once investigated and dismissed a tip-off that the attacker, who legally owned a gun, was mentally unstable. This is a city in mourning, but it's a country in shock too. Shock which deepens with every fresh, distressing revelation. And one question persists here. Why? Jenny Hill, BBC News, Hamburg.
Members of Scotland's largest teaching union have voted to accept a pay deal and end their strike action. 90% of union members voted to accept the agreement, which will mean a 7% pay rise backdated to last April and an additional 7% by next January. Teachers in Wales have also called off 2 days of planned strikes to consider a new pay offer from the Welsh Government. In England, 2 days of strikes are still planned. Silicon Valley Bank, a lender to major tech firms, has been shut down by regulators in the biggest banking failure in the US since the financial crisis in 2008. There had been a run on the bank by customers and investors after it failed to raise enough money to cope with rising interest rates. The King has made his youngest brother, Prince Edward, the new Duke of Edinburgh. It's a title strongly associated with their father, Prince Philip, who was Duke of Edinburgh for more than 70 years, up to his death in 2021. Prince Edward will hold the title for his lifetime. Teachers and children are warning of the dangers of vaping after reports of a big rise amongst the under-18s for whom it's illegal. Although the NHS says they are far less harmful than cigarettes for adults who are trying to quit smoking, there are fears that a generation of young people who've never smoked are increasingly getting hooked on the nicotine in vapes. Our health editor Hugh Pym reports.
This school has a problem.
Right, so this is our vape sensor that we had installed at Christmas.
The head teacher is trying to stamp out vaping.
We've noticed a real reduction, 16 cases or alerts on the first day, down to 1 or 2 a week.
He wanted to show us the scale of the challenge and the numbers involved.
So these are the ones that we've confiscated, and these ones really are my least favourite. They're branded as sweets.
Connor, Leon and Oscar see themselves as addicts. 2 of them started vaping at 12.
They bring a new flavour out, you want to try that, and it just keeps going, so on, so on. You're buying nicotine, aren't you, really? Like, you're spending your money on nicotine and stuff. Like, it's not something you can stop that easy.
It controls the whole way that you think, and like I said, I would literally go out and meet someone if I hadn't had one for a few days, and I'd just crave it.
The boys say that unlike them, children who've never smoked are now starting to vape.
Year 7s are going on to it, but like they're going on to vapes just for the social life, not because they used to smoke or anything, not because they've been brought up in a house that smoked or whatever.
So what measures are being taken on the high street to restrict supplies of e-cigarettes to under-18s? Some retailers say they're doing everything they possibly can to avoid underage sales. It's illegal to sell to children. Andy says he's always on the lookout for fake ID, but some other retailers are less responsible.
If we spot an adult buying them for kids, we ban them for life, you know. We do everything we can, basically. There's £2,500 fine if you get caught selling to underage, but I just wish they'd enforce it and double it. Cheers, Carl.
Carl is a regular at the shop. He says he's often mobbed by children waiting outside.
Groups of them, they come up to you and just go in there for me, go and get this for me, here's the money, can you get this? And it's just, if I do it, I'll get banned. And I don't want to get banned, and I would never do it because they're underage.
Back at the school, they say health warnings for children must be stronger.
These vapes are helping people quit smoking, and that's a good thing for their health. But we're not talking about children that were smoking and start using electronic cigarettes. They're actively uptaking the vapes as a lifestyle choice.
Hugh Pym, BBC News.
Early last year, a video emerged of a young woman in Afghanistan screaming for help as security officials of the country's Taliban rulers came to arrest her. Tamana Pariani and her sisters had taken part in protests in support of women's rights. Since the Taliban seized power in 2021, girls have been excluded from secondary education and from universities. A strict dress code has been imposed, with women told to wear the hijab in public. And there are restrictions on work. Recently, women were banned from working for aid agencies. Our correspondent Yalda Hakim has been following the story of Tamana and her sisters over the past year, from their arrest and imprisonment to fleeing Afghanistan and finding refuge in Germany.
A young woman's cry for help. These images, recorded on activist Tamana Pariani's phone, then uploaded onto Facebook, went viral. The Taliban were attempting to arrest her and her sisters.
They started kicking the door. It was terrifying. I felt as if they were kicking my heart. I thought they'd rape me and my sisters. I wanted to escape. I jumped out of the window.
Their crime? Demanding basic rights like education at a protest in Kabul. Their apartment was ransacked and they spent a month in prison. After their release, I travelled to Kabul to find out what happened to them.
I thought the prison guard was going to kill us. I tried to move out of the way, but he attacked me. He came up and kicked my head. Then I fainted. After hitting me a few times, he went for Zarmina and he hit her too. He warned us that if he hurt us again, next time it would be worse.
Even though they were set free, the fear remained. Almost every night, Tamana moved from house to house in Kabul, relying on the goodwill of friends to keep her safe.
I wear this to feel safe because the Taliban won't recognise me. I can no longer sit outside in a public space. They love to cause problems and keep you under surveillance. I have to move from this place.
Eventually, they decided to flee Afghanistan, and they agreed to film their journey for the BBC. Hiding under burqas, Tamana and her sisters made several attempts to flee by land to Pakistan, and failed. They finally made it across the border. After a week of uncertainty, Germany offered them asylum.
Even now, when I close the bedroom door, I think of the Taliban smashing the doors and windows of our house. Even though I think the doors here are stronger than Kabul, I'm still anxious and need to sleep in a room where the doors and windows are secure.
While Tamana and her sisters are now safe in Cologne, their struggle is not over.
I didn't just come here in search of my own freedom. My escape is the start of my battle with the Taliban. I'm hopeful that one day I can return to my own country and have the kind of life I have here without the fear of terrorists.
While Tamana and her sisters are now safe in Cologne, their struggle is not over. They say they'll never give up the fight for the rights of Afghan women and girls still living in Afghanistan under Taliban rule. Yalda Hakim, BBC News.
Now, it may surprise you to know that country music is the fastest growing genre in the UK. Last year, country songs were streamed a record 1.4 billion times here. That's up nearly fourfold from 5 years ago. This weekend sees the 10th C2C Country Music Festival taking place in London, Glasgow and Dublin. Felicity Baker has put on her cowboy boots and gone along for the ride.
Country music is here. The genre best known for tunes about love, heartbreak and pickup trucks is seeing a huge surge in popularity across the UK. Now, country music is bringing its own distinct identity to these shores.
I feel like the thing that has always kind of set country music apart is the ability to say what a lot of people are thinking in song form. There's something really true and really authentic about it, and so many of us write from legit experience, you know, whether it happened to us, whether it happened to a family member or a friend. Those are the songs that really just speak to people.
With all the Stetsons and cowboy boots, you might think you're in Nashville, but this is C2C Festival, being held in London, Glasgow and Dublin this weekend. Now in its 10th year, it attracts some of country music's top stars, and it's the biggest festival of its kind outside the US.
I love guitars, I love hats, tassels, boots, I love it all.
Silly cars, big stakes, country music, wide open spaces. That's what it's all about, isn't it?
The songs really like take you somewhere and they tell you a story. I love that about country music. Like that's the main thing that I love. And obviously, you know, love a cowboy boot, love a cowboy. You know, good time.
Don't touch my V8 engine with the windows tinted, boy.
Turns out the artists love it just as much as we do.
I always tell the UK fans, honestly, that they are my favorite audience to play in front of in the world. and London is my favorite city to play in the world, and that's high praise because I'm from the States.
It's not just US artists taking the scene by storm. Ward Thomas were the first country act to have a chart-topping album in the UK. Country music is now the biggest growing genre of music in the UK, officially.
Is that real? That's so exciting. That's so exciting.
So exciting.
I mean, it's proof. You can see here at the C2C, it's getting bigger and bigger every year. Like,
more stages are coming up.
It's really exciting. It's catching on.
When the world is lost, something's found.
So, the UK is embracing the boots, the hats and the rhinestones. Is this just the beginning? Felicity Baker, BBC News.
Hundreds of schools across the UK have been closed today as heavy snow caused widespread disruption and misery for motorists. Drivers heading across the Pennines were stuck for up to 7 hours overnight after heavy snowfalls on the M62 motorway. At one point, there was 17 miles of congestion. The A66 between Brough and Bowes was closed until lunchtime, with traffic queuing up to use the road. Barnard Castle in County Durham woke up to a beautiful blanket of snow, although much of it has melted over the course of the day. Time then for a look at the weather to see what's going on this weekend. Here's Alina Jenkins.
Hello there, Reeta. There's been lots of snow in the forecast over the past few days. This was Powys in Wales earlier on today. Lovely to look at, but no good at all if you have to travel through it. There is still some snow in the forecast this weekend. It will start to turn milder, though, for many. And the area of low pressure that brought the rain, the snow and the strong winds today is now clearing away into the North Sea. Brief spell of something quieter tonight before our next system arrives from the Atlantic as we head through tomorrow. But tonight, for many, plenty of clear skies across the UK. That's going to lead to a widespread frost and ice as well. Still some snow showers feeding into northern Scotland, wintry showers for the Western Isles, some rain and hill snow across the southwest of England, parts of Wales, maybe Northern Ireland. But look at these temperatures quite widely at -4 or -5 Celsius, -10 or -11 where we've had the snow. For the weekend, dry for many tomorrow, particularly the further east you are. There will be more snow arriving into northern England and Scotland, and then slowly turning milder through Sunday. So this is how we start Saturday, with a good deal of sunshine. But you'll notice this area of rain and hill snow across southwest England, pushing into Wales and Northern Ireland through the day. Could see a few snow showers across the far north of England and into Scotland. But for many, it's dry. The best of the sunshine the further east you are. Temperatures still just maybe 4 to 8 Celsius, -1 across the Northern Isles, but 12 Celsius for the Isles of Scilly. Then as we head through Saturday evening, this band of rain and snow starts to push its way northwards, bringing further snow into parts of northern England and Scotland. And that's all tied in with yet another frontal system clearing away north and eastwards through Sunday. And then for a time, something drier and brighter. And then, yes, there's another one in the Atlantic pushing its way towards us. So for Sunday, what we'll notice is that we'll be turning milder. The winds will be strengthening. There'll be a good deal of sunshine for many, but rain will start to pile in to western areas. But the temperatures eventually starting to rise for many. Rita.
Alina, thank you. And that is tonight's BBC News at 10. The news does continue here on BBC One. As now it's time to join our colleagues across the nations and regions for the news where you are. From the 10 o'clock team, it's good night.